yourself?
No, I don't do that because I don't have the computer to store all that stuff.
Oh,
I don't
that's
have the.
okay. Well, Lillian
Yeah.
must be around somewhere.
Good afternoon, good evening, good morning. Welcome back to Global Media Network, LLC. Passionate World Radio Network is a wholly owned subsidiary of GMN, LLC. And our program today, Lest with a D, We Forget - Historical. We are talking about immigration from South America, Central America, and Mexico at the moment. And so we are going to start off with Lisa Skinner, and she will begin talking about immigration in the 21st century, notably 2018. Lisa?
Thanks, Lillian. Actually, I am going to specifically be talking about the current border crisis. And this dates back to 2018 when the problems initially started that are present today. I've researched many resources and put together this informational narrative for you based on the research that I've done. So this is what I found out. By the hundreds of thousands, Central American families and children without their parents migrated to the southwest border. They were pushed by the threat of violence and by economic hardships in their countries. They were pulled in by the chance at a good job in a booming U.S. economy. They were lured by smugglers dangling a false promise that if they bring their children, they will get to stay in the U.S. So between October 2018 and September, which is the U.S. government's fiscal year, CBP law enforced personal apprehended or have deemed inadmissible nearly 1 million illegal immigrants crossing the southwest border, which is the most in nearly 15 years. CBP had to address the humanitarian crisis while enforcing hundreds of laws and regulations, keeping Americans safe by intercepting dangerous drugs and criminals crossing the border, and facilitating legitimate trade and travel at 328 U.S. ports of entry. 5 years later, work of reuniting families separated at the U.S.-Mexico border remains unfinished. That was as of June 11th, 2022. In June 2018, family separations at the U.S.-Mexico border made international headlines after audio emerged from a federal detention facility showing scores of sobbing children packed together, screaming for their parents. Though news of the separations came to light in 2018, a pilot program had actually started in 2017 in El Paso, Texas. 5 years later, of the more than 5,000 children who, court documents say, were separated from their parents under former President Donald Trump's zero-tolerance policy for unauthorized border crossers and those who presented themselves legally at ports of entry, about 180 children have yet to be reunited with their parents. Well, that's not a true number. I'll get to that in a second. Many of those parents were expelled from the United States, an immigration attorney told VOA. Well, some of these children ended up in foster care. Others are with relatives that they had never seen before. Lawyers with the American Civil Liberties Union believe the number of children yet to be returned to their parents is much higher, like way over 1,000. We believe that more than 1,000 families are still not reunited. Lee Gelnert told the VOA. He's the lead ACLU attorney who sued to stop the Trump administration policy and represents separated families suing the US government for damages and other types of relief. He says, I've been doing this work for 30 years, and this is by far the worst thing that I have ever seen. We're talking about really a historical wrong by this country, because this was no accident. It wasn't a few mistakes. It was a deliberate policy at the highest levels of the United States government, sitting down and saying, let's take children away from their parents, so that the parents say, let's just give up our asylum claims, and no one ever tries to come in. Now, I just happened to be talking to a young woman about a week or so ago. She's kind of lives in my community. Excuse me. And this is kind of what inspired us to want to talk about this topic. And she told me that she has family members who were separated from their children 5 years ago at the border when they tried to cross. And those children still have not been reunited with their parents. And they have no idea where these children are still after all these years. These were not her children, they were nieces and nephews, but she also told me that she knows many, many, many families who were in that same, trying to cross the border in that same time period, whose children were taken away from them, separated from them, and now still 5 years later, they still have not been reunited with them, and they have no idea where their children are. So firsthand accounting of exactly what I'm sharing with you today. Within weeks of taking office in January 2021, President Joe Biden created an interagency task force to reunite children separated from their families at the United States-Mexico border. The Department of Homeland Security announced in March of 2021 that some of the families could be reunited in the United States and be allowed to stay. And DHS, Department of Homeland Security, created websites in English, Spanish, and other languages where separated family members could register for help in finding their children. Thousands of separated children have been reunited with their parents since 2017. But while the Biden administration points to progress, immigration advocates point to an effort they say continues to be hampered by logistical, legal, and political hurdles. In a December written statement, DHS told VOA the Interagency Task Force has made significant and important progress. As of March, a year since its creation, the task force, along with nonprofits, has reunited, 147 children with their parents. About 1,075 families have registered using the two DHS websites. Some are outside the US waiting to be reunited, and some have been reunited and live in the United States. Under the Trump administration, the process of reuniting the families began after a federal judge ordered the government to stop separations and reunite families within 30 days. Think that happened? The government missed the court's deadline, and most of the work was done by the ACLU and immigration nonprofits. We are just continuing to look for them, Mr. Gerland said. It has now been 5 years, and there are some children who haven't seen their parents in 4 to 5 years. And so we are in this horrendous situation where the children, some of them so young, they don't even really remember their parents. So the question is, how did the US-Mexican border become such an unrelenting humanitarian crisis? And why is it still going on 5 years later? In the summer of 2018, one of the first refugee camps in the history of the US-Mexico border formed in the city of Matamoros on the banks of the Rio Grande, or Rio Bravo, as it is known in Mexico, less than a kilometer from the international bridge leading to Brownsville, Texas. The camp was a powerful symbol of the humanitarian impact of policies enacted by the administration of US President Donald Trump to crack down on migration at the border and restrict access to asylum. In March of 2021, shortly after Joe Biden replaced Trump as president, the camp was dismantled when hundreds of people who had been living there, some for more than 2 years, were finally allowed to enter the United States to pursue their asylum cases. Volunteers who had been providing assistance in the camp breathed a sigh of relief. We did it. We actually did it. Andrea Rudnick, a 64-year-old retired school teacher and co-founder of the local aid organization Team Brownsville, remembers thinking, maybe we'll be out of this business by the summer. Oh boy, that was a lot of work, but we're done, she said at the time. Instead, 2 years later, the encampment in Matamoros is back. The original site is fenced off now, but asylum seekers and migrants are sleeping in makeshift tents right next to where the old camp was located. The fence surrounding the old campsite serves as a clothesline for people in the new camp, and the old campsite itself is an open latrine because the new campsite only has a handful of portable toilets for a population that has fluctuated between 800 and more than 2,000 in recent months. But the return of the encampment in Matamoros is a sign that a more fundamental shift has taken place. Having tens of thousands of asylum seekers and migrants stranded by US policies in vulnerable living conditions in northern Mexico was unheard of prior to 2018. It is now taken for granted. An endemic humanitarian crisis with no end in sight. The crisis in northern Mexico predated Title 42, but according to local aid workers and activists, the policies helped exacerbate it by paving the way for the United States to rapidly expel people who entered irregularly back to Mexico without allowing them to apply for asylum. More than 2.6 million expulsions were carried out just over the past 3 years. In the past, asylum seekers and migrants had been kept in stash houses by the cartels that control the people, smuggling routes into the United States, or had passed quickly through northern Mexico, staying a handful of days at most before applying for asylum at a port of entry, or after being caught and deported for irregularly entering the United States or living there undocumented. As Trump put in place one new restrictive policy after another, that changed. And now we could see the asylum seekers and migrants they're referring to, Burberry said. Suddenly people, including many families, women and children, were sleeping rough on the bridges leading to the US ports of entry or on sidewalks nearby. The existing humanitarian infrastructure, which is primarily consisting of a few shelters and soup kitchens, was quickly overwhelmed. An ad hoc network of volunteers, local aid organizations, and churches sprang into action to provide food, sleeping bags, tents, clothing, and other essentials to the people who found themselves stuck. When Biden took office in January of 2021, there was a moment of optimism on the part of aid workers and rights activists that the situation at the border might actually improve. Trump's border policies were a potent symbol of his administration's racism and cruelty towards asylum seekers and migrants. And Biden had promised during the 2020 campaign to make a more fair and humane approach. However, 2.5 years later, that optimism is gone. This is not going to stop, said Lourdes Gonzalez, who runs a shelter for particularly at-risk asylum seekers and migrants in Reynosa, Mexico. The level of desperation and vulnerability, however, has remained constant. En route to the border, people face violence, extortion, kidnapping, and sexual assault from gangs, cartels, and government authorities. They pass through all that, plus they get stuck there, Gonzalez said. They don't know what to do. And it's not like, okay, I'll just go back. They can't go back. As of May of 2023, so this year, a few months ago, economic, social, and political pressures have caused massive displacement of people around the globe, dramatically increasing the number of people seeking asylum. A growing number of migrants from diverse countries such as Mexico, Honduras, Venezuela, Cuba, Haiti, India, and Ukraine are all risking their lives to reach the United States. For most, though, the factors for leaving their home country include violence, political instability, exacerbated poverty levels due to rising inflation and the COVID-19 pandemic, and the impacts of climate change on extreme weather, agriculture, and livelihoods. Migrants that make the journey north risk exhaustion, hunger, violence from criminal gangs, robbery, sexual abuse, and, as we've talked about in a couple previous episodes, human trafficking. It is rampant at the US border. Children arrive at shelters malnourished and dehydrated due to a lack of food and clean water during their journey. Women and children face a risk of sexual violence and human trafficking. Many migrants that make the journey are unaccompanied minors. So this is really the state of the situation now. The absence of border security, in conjunction with non-existent interior enforcement, has made the US a fertile breeding ground for human trafficking. Human trafficking is a global business generating, and I think this is consistent with what Lillian quoted to us a couple episodes ago. Human trafficking is a global business generating $150 billion in illegal profits. It encompasses forced labor, sex trafficking, organ trafficking, and more. President Biden has professed a commitment to fight this multifaceted criminal enterprise, yet his immigration policies have only made the situation worse. Human trafficking increased massively in the last fiscal year. Arrests rose 50%, convictions soared by 80%. The vast majority, 72% of those trafficked in the US are immigrants. Most of them are here illegally. Many are women and children who are highly vulnerable to being smuggled and eventually trafficked. A study from the Coalition Against Trafficking in Women estimated that 60% of unaccompanied alien children, they call them UACs, are caught by the cartels and exploited through child pornography and drug trafficking. To put this into perspective, more than 150,000 unaccompanied alien children crossed into our country just last year. The Biden administration responded by declaring January National Human Trafficking Prevention Month. This, of course, did nothing to curb the problem. That month, 5,882 unaccompanied children crossed the border, which was an increase of more than 80% over the number logged by the Trump administration in January of 2020. And finally, the dramatic increase can be traced directly to the Biden administration's open border policies. On average, over 12,000 unaccompanied children are entering the nation monthly in 2023. This information is just overwhelming. And have you ever heard this before? No, they don't tell us. I had to dig really deep to find this information, but here you have it. So that said, I'm now going to turn the floor over to Lillian, and she will share with you the information that she has discovered on the status of our U.S. border crisis. Thanks. Lillian?
Thank you. The first thing I want to say is the next time you read how wonderful our country is and what a big improvement it has made over the countries back in Europe, the Western countries and some of the Eastern countries, I just want you to remember several things. Our ancestors, well, not mine, but for the white Anglo-Saxon Protestants and Catholics, put it more bluntly, they came from the very place where these people are now trying to come to, again, to this country seeking asylum. And because of that, their prejudices, their attitudes, their perspective, their history, their manifest destiny, which still continues, was brought to this country. So before you point any fingers at them, or Germany, or Japan, or North Korea, Iran, or some of the cult religions in this country, the Mormons, the Amish, and several others, just remember this: we are all alike. We have the same temperaments, we have the same perspectives, opinions, beliefs, and we do the same thing that everybody does over there. In Nazi Germany, when the Jews arrived at the concentration camps, women and men were separated. Women, babies, and young children were separated. Same thing In the Japanese camps, the men and women were separated and the children were separated from the parents. Ellis Island, children were separated from their parents if they were sick. Guess what? They had trouble finding the parents once the parents left the island. They didn't know where they went to. A lot of them did not have relatives to go to, but they released them on the streets to be beaten, to be bullied, to be stolen from, to be raped, to go into prostitution because they had no other way of supporting themselves or taking care of themselves. Remember the Statue of Liberty given to us by the French? Give us you're poor, give us you're hungry. Guess what? That's propaganda. We haven't followed any of the tenets of what the Statue of Liberty has meant since the Irish and the Catholic Italians came over. And we all know what happened to them between the gangs and the mafia. So, United States citizens, please remember from whence you came and don't think you're superior to any other country on this planet because you're not. Our country has problems just like every other country on this planet have. And we're no better or no worse. And even though the original forefathers who came from this country, from Europe, had grand ideas, they did not stay very long intact because what you think is wonderful and great is how they're interpreted and implemented by the people who are in power. Why am I saying this? Because children who came from Central America, South America, and Mexico were usually sent by their parents or grandparents to get them out of the towns and cities where children as young as 8 years old were made into children soldiers. So by the time they hit their preteen years of 9, 10, and 11, they were taught how to kill. And that is why we have so many children up by our borders, because their parents want a better life for them. So everybody raise their hands and tell me how they want a better life for their children, whether they live in the ghetto or the inner city or out in the country where property is king. It's there, folks. They call them different names, but it's the same thing. It's the same cherished dream. We want something better for our children. Who knew that the United States government would label these kids as unaccompanied alien children? Not to be confused with the aliens that come in spaceships. Big distinction. Who knows? Maybe if you're running away from the United States because of the political tensions here between the West and the East, your child may be labeled an alien when they try to seek asylum in England. Oh, wait, they can't because all the Muslims are in England and there's no room at the inn anymore. Except in England, they put all the Muslims into hotels. They don't make them wait in the freezing cold or the thunderstorms or in tent cities. But hey, that's what we put our homeless in. And if it's good enough for the homeless, isn't it good enough for the alien children? Think about it. A lot of the information that Lisa provided, I also have. which tells you that the information is very limited on what Google can unearth for our discrimination against immigration adults and their children. And I mean discrimination, because they are not wanted. Although 25, 30 years ago, they were welcome, because those are the people they put into all our agricultural fields to pick all the vegetables and the fruit that our society deemed themselves above picking, because only immigrants did that kind of work. Proud Americans did not. It was beneath us. So children under the age of 18 are considered unaccompanied alien children. And yes, they were separated at the border by a law that never existed. But that's okay. When you're president of the United States, you can make up laws as you go along. Who's going to say you're wrong? Well, apparently our congressman said didn't. They went right along with the mythology that it was all right to separate children. And we're not talking about kids 9, 10 years old. No, we're talking about babies and toddlers who haven't seen their parents in 5 years. And these kids have now grown up to where they're children, and they don't even know who their parents are, because they do not remember who their parents are, having not the memory from a 2-year-old up to a 9 years old, and remembering their father's or mother's facial features. How would you like it if your child was removed from you when you took them to daycare, and you came in late and they say, nope, you can't have your child. You're an unfit parent because you're not picking up your child on time. Therefore, the state is going to keep the child. Is that any different from the war orphans that are put in orphanages in China and in the Soviet Union? Oh, excuse me, Russia. I get the two names confused because they both have the same policies. Or those other children who are casualties of war, so they're put into the institutions not knowing who their parents are? Yes, well, let me continue. They have found that the children who were separated at the border were put into the custody of the Office of Refugee Resettlement under the Department of Health and Human Service. Doesn't seem right. Health and Human Service, refugees, doesn't sound like they belong together, do they? And they were responsible for finding and screening relatives of these children that are already here in the United States. Well, they did that too back in the early 1900s. If you were coming in from Italy or Ireland or another place from Europe, you had to have a name of a relative that you would be going to once you were released from Ellis Island. And if you did not have a relative here in the States, you were turned back and sent back to the country you just vacated. My, how things haven't improved. So what happens to the kids who are separated? As Lisa pointed out, they're put into the Rio Grande Valley in Texas. And from October 2017 to April 2018, 700 families were split apart by Trump. And that was just the tip of the icebergs. Reuters reported that there were 1,800 families were separated between 2016 to February 2018, but it had been going on for some time. By May 31st, 1,995 children were taken from 1,940 adults. And they recognized that the facilities that the government had provided for these children were not sufficient. So they ended up in foster care with foster parents who never fostered a child before in their life, or they went to relatives who were of the same blood, but they didn't know who these children were. So you think about that, having your child not returned to you and then put into a place where there may be a child molester or a pedophile who's registered or not registered with the government. Makes you kind of wonder what these people are thinking about. Oh, I know, they were alien children. They were not from the United States. Therefore, they were not protected by the US government. There have been claims of verbal, physical abuse, sexual abuse. When PBS Frontier did an investigation, they found that teens who were released were either put into labor camps or to human traffickers, which means they were part of the slave trafficking business. Now, if you were an immigrant, how would you like to hear that your 13-year-old son or daughter was now being used as a whore overseas in Thailand? Or maybe in Saudi Arabia? How would you like to hear that if you got to hear about it at all? And of course, the government said, and Lisa also stated, that these parents were really criminals, and therefore they did not deserve to have their children with them, because they were just using them as an excuse to enter the United States. Therefore, the children need to be removed and the parent or parents punished for them having the audacity of wanting to bring their kids into the United States, away from war, away from soldiers, and into a better life. See, what were they thinking? Wanting to have a better life for their kids. Some people, some of the children were reunited, but not enough. And as Lisa explained, the ACLU did bring a lawsuit against it. Guess what? The lawsuit is still going on, and that ACLU lawyer is still fighting to get benefits, not only for the children, but also for the parents. In fact, one government official stated off the record that each immigrant parent should receive at least $4,500 to help pay for mental and psychiatric help for these kids who will have long-lasting mental health problems until they are adults and continuing as adults, which doesn't say very much for the United States government or for the government of former President Trump, who didn't think anything about treating children as adults and separating them from their parents. It is estimated that 100,000 children, and that was the last count, is still separated from their parents. And most of the other information I have is what Lisa has already introduced. So I will not go over it, because just by repeating it, it's not going to make the Americans feel any better. The problem is that these people you are putting into office is supposed to represent the citizens of this country. So my question is, are you being representative by these people. Now, some of the people will say, yes, this is exactly what we want. We want harsh measures to be against the immigrants. But understand this, ladies and gentlemen, you are, in fact, tearing and attacking yourselves, because we are all immigrants in this country. The only Native Americans are the indigenous people who lived here before we came here. Betsy?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Wow, border sure is a hot mess, folks, isn't it? I took a different angle about the border crisis, but I do want to say that I'll play devil's advocate here. America has its faults. This is true, treating people, but yet you don't see thousands upon thousands of people going over to other countries, nor when they get there do they get hotels, free phone, free medical care. And our veterans are suffering and nobody seems to care about them. But what also is going on at the border that people may not realize is the cartel is coming over. And when 2 people from a cartel were caught with a body piercing bullets in their guns. So if an officer or border security should have on their armor plates, whatever they use, protection, it won't do any good because those bullets can pierce them. It's a hot mess, folks. I don't have the answers or the solutions, but these cartel people are coming over with their fentanyl and they're killing Americans. Thousands and thousands of Americans are dying from fentanyl. And where are they getting that fentanyl from? China. And the cartel is not just in the US, but all over. A lot of people coming over are not vetted. They could be very well be criminals. Yes, there's human trafficking. There's rapes going on. There's assaults going on. But I mean, I couldn't picture giving up my child at a young age. You know, I'd want them to have a better life, but to trust them to strangers to bring my child safely over to the US, that has to be tough. I don't even know if I would trust someone to do that, to be honest with you. And this is how the children, boys or girls, get into the human trafficking. And the cartels are using them for whatever purpose that they think they should be used for. The sanctuary cities that said, oh, no, we'll have our, we'll take the immigrants, are now being flooded. There's no place for them. They're being shipped up to upstate New York. And upstate New York, they're going into schools and making, shelters for them. One woman was raped in front of her 2 or 3-year-old child by someone who is illegal. Yes, it could happen to people who are legally here. I'm not against illegals, folks. I am a byproduct of illegals, as I like to say. My mother's parents came over illegally through through Canada. I think because one of them had pink eye. And that's why they came over illegally. And Lillian was talking about, coming over for a better life because they don't want their children to serve in a war. My grandmother told me that one of her relatives, they came over. My grandmother's aunt and uncle were already over here before World War I because they didn't want their sons to go into the war to serve in the Russian army. It was Russia at that time. Now it's the Ukraine, ironically. But that's where my grandparents were from. And they come over for a better life. And this is true. Everybody wants a better life. Everybody wants to live in peace and harmony. But what people, I think, get annoyed with is that they're coming over illegally. Now, the process of processing these immigrants has to be better. We need more judges. The legal system has to improve of getting citizenship quicker. That needs to really, they need to step up their game with that. How they do that, I don't know. That's above my pay grade. Have no solution for that. But, you know, we all came from immigrants, some of us illegals. My grandfather did become a citizen. My grandmother couldn't because she was too busy caregiving. So caregiving runs in my blood. But they wanted a better life. Everybody wants a better life. But when you had these illegal immigrants in housing, you don't know who they are, they're not vetted, it becomes a danger to the neighborhoods. Who's teaching these children? Do we have the teachers to teach these children in the languages that they know? And they come from all over. Is there enough schools? Is there enough school space? Is there enough shelter and housing for everyone to live comfortably? And I think that's what people are getting really annoyed with. And President Biden really needs to face this border crisis. Something has to be, people can't just be coming over by the thousands every day. Where are we going to put them? Texas has no room. People criticize Texas because they shipped up the illegals all over the place. And now those same cities are shipping those same people again somewhere. So, you know, if you're going to be a sanctuary city, then welcome these people in. They're having difficulty getting money from the federal government. So it's a huge mess. Very huge mess. And do we, you know, the police had their hands tied, Border Patrol has their hands tied. That Mayorkas guy accused 2 border patrols of beating immigrants with a horse, a strap. They weren't beating the immigrants. They were guiding the horses. So people, and Mayorkas never apologized to these 2 people whose careers that he ruined. So we really have to look at what's going on from all angles. And that's what I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that it is a problem that needs to be solved. The only thing I believe that we're saying is don't take it out on the kids.
Mm-hmm.
They're the innocent ones. They really have no say should their parents want to bring them up here for whatever the reason. And I really don't think that separating them is going to punish anybody except the kids. And they're being punished because they're kids. They don't have much to say. So it leaves them in a no man's land. And don't get me wrong, we all love our country, but we can also see its bad underbelly. And if we don't do something about the badness of its underbelly, it's never going to get better. It will just continue to be magnified and to get worse. And you have to understand that. So what you hear on Lest We Forget -historical is opinions, research, and the hope that any country is big enough to actually listen to what their citizens are telling them and then trying to do better. Because quite frankly, there's no other place we can run to anymore where we can find a new country to settle in, because there are no more new countries or continents to find on this planet. They're all in use, folks. Running to outer space, it's not the answer and won't be for another 100 years. So everybody, let's give our emails And a call to action would be, let us know what you thought about today's program. Write a comment, send it to us. Let us know how you feel. I know everybody has a voice. It's heard all the time. So let's hear you speak up. You can DM me, direct message me at pwrnetworkllc@gmail.com. Lisa?
And I think I just want to add one other thing, because it's really the main focal point of this show and why Lillian brilliantly named it Lest We Forget. And why we do this every week is because we desperately want to remind everybody about history. And I have this huge echo in my head screaming at me right this second, with this voice saying, nothing's changing. And I don't even think it's a matter of lest we forgetting. I think we're continuing the same behaviors and repeating them, and not really taking into consideration the consequences of our actions that have been cemented in history. While Lillian was giving her information to us, I couldn't help thinking how similar this sounded to the topic we just talked about a few episodes ago, slavery in the United States, and how a slave could expect to be sold maybe once or twice or more than that in their lifetime by the master who owned them at the time. And that included being separated from their children. And even after they were freed in 1865, a lot of those families looked for their children that they had been separated from and never found them and never knew what became of them. And doesn't this sound like exactly what we've just done to the immigrants that have tried to cross our border? So did we learn anything from that? I'm not seeing that we did. I just wanted to make mention of that, because as I was listening to Lillian's presentation, I couldn't help but thinking, oh, here we go again. Oh, here we go again. And it's a sad state of affairs. And if we haven't changed our behavior in 200 something years. So hopefully we give you something really profound to think about with the information that we present, because it's all true. It's all facts. And yeah, there's some opinion in there, but the majority of what we present to everybody is factual information that has been proven and substantiated throughout history. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that because this whole thing just absolutely breaks my heart. My email is dementiawhisperer1@gmail.com. And I want to thank you all again for taking the time out of your day to listen to our program. And we certainly hope that you find the information valuable, at least eye-opening at a minimum. Thank you. Betsy.
My email is Sloan, SLOAN, Betsy, BETSY 31 @gmail.com. And I just want to comment, you were talking, Lisa, about slavery, and Lillian was talking about children. Unfortunately, the children are the victims. And that's sad. It's sad because these parents are trusting these people that take their children over for a better life and then they're sold. And as we discussed probably 2 or 3 episodes ago, that human slavery is at an all-time high. And I wonder if it's at an all-time high because of the amount of people coming over and they are being sold into the human trafficking. Something to think about. And I have to say this to the audience, I sure have learned a lot from the show. Really eye-opening, have learned a tremendous amount that I did not know before. And in October, the title of the movie just went out of my head. It's about the Osage Indians in Oklahoma. Robert De Niro is in it. I have to get the name of the movie because it's about the Osage Indians discovering oil and the white men taking away their money and their oil, and we're getting killed for it. Looking forward to watching that movie, and when I see it, I will comment on it. But thank you all for listening.
Thank you all very much for listening. We hope you enjoyed and perhaps even learned something today. We welcome all comments, opinions, whether you agree with us, whether you disagree with us. We want to hear, we want to know what you think, what you would like to hear. We can't do that unless you speak up. That's why we're giving you a voice. You can see this, lest we forget, all over again on youtube.com/PWR network _PW Talk Radio, on facebook.com/Passionate World Radio, linkedin.com/Passionate World Radio, and of course on our website, passionateworldtalkradio.com. Once again, thank you very much for listening, and remember, please keep listening. Thank you very much.